Imagine stumbling upon a campsite abandoned in panic, a tent shredded open from the inside, bare footprints leading into a blizzard, bodies scattered in the snow, some half naked, some crushed with force no human should endure, and one with her tongue and eyes missing. It was late January of 1959 when 9 young hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on what should have been the adventure of a lifetime. They were experienced mountaineers, hardened by years of trekking through some of the Soviet Union's most hostile landscapes. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his meticulous planning and calm leadership. With him were 8 other companions. Their goal was Mount Oturton, a place whose name in the indigenous Mansi language means "don't go there." At the time, the name was just a curious footnote, a local legend. The hikers laughed about it, dismissing it as superstition. On January 27th, after days of travel, the group arrived in Fiza, the last settlement before the wilderness. Here, they stocked up on bread, meat, and supplies, joking with villagers who warned them about the deadly cold. On January 28th, Yuri Yudin, the 10th member of their group, fell ill. Severe joint pain from an old injury forced him to turn back. From that moment on, 9 hikers continued alone into the abyss. The weather turned against them almost immediately. Harsh winds howled across the peaks, erasing their tracks in minutes. Snow blinded their path. Each step became a battle against exhaustion, against frostbite gnawing at their fingers and toes. Yet still, they pressed on. They sang songs, posed for the camera, scribbled cheerful notes in their diaries. Everything seemed safe. But in the background of these innocent snapshots lies a haunting truth. These images are the last living moments we will ever see of them. By February 1st, they reached the slopes of Kholat Siakhal, another name given by the Mansi, translating to the Mountain of the Dead. A storm forced him to camp on the mountainside itself, an unusual decision. Instead of retreating into the forest for shelter, the Dyatlov chose to set their tent directly on the exposed slope. Perhaps it was to prove their endurance. Perhaps they simply miscalculated. Either way, it was a fatal mistake. That night, under the pitch black sky, their tent glowed faintly against the storm. Inside, they cooked a modest meal, bread and tinned meat, and huddled together, their bodies the only warmth in a world of frozen silence. Laughter faded into yawns. Diaries were written, and then, at some unknown hour of the night, something happened. Something so terrifying, so inexplicable, that 9 seasoned hikers cut their way out of the tent and fled barefoot into the snow, never to return. When the hikers did not return on schedule, no one panicked at first. Delays were common on expeditions of this nature. Perhaps they were slowed by storms or forced to reroute their trail. Families reassured themselves. Igor Dyatlov was a meticulous leader, careful and resourceful. If anyone could handle the brutal cold of the Urals, it was him. Days passed, then a week, then another, and still no word. By mid-February, the anxiety had grown unbearable. Parents wrote frantic letters to the university. Finally, under mounting pressure, a search party was organized. Students, volunteers, and local hunters joined the effort. Soon after, the Soviet military stepped in, deploying planes and helicopters to scour the snow-choked mountains. On February 25th, weeks after the hikers had vanished, searchers spotted something half buried in the snow. A collapsed canvas tent. It was barely visible, its fabric stiff with frost, flapping weakly in the bitter wind. As they approached, dread set in. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. Inside, the scene was wrong. Horribly wrong. The hikers' belongings were scattered, abandoned in haste. Heavy coats, boots, and gloves, all the essential gear for survival in minus 30 degrees, lay neatly arranged, untouched. Their journals, cameras, and food supplies sat undisturbed. Even a flask of vodka remained unopened. It was as if the group had simply run into the night, barefoot, half-dressed, and no chance of surviving more than minutes in that cold. But the most chilling detail was not what was left behind. It was the footprints. In the snow leading away from the tent, investigators found dozens of tracks, some from boots, others from bare feet. even socks. They trailed downhill toward the forest, vanishing into the shadows of the trees. Something had driven them out all at once into certain death. The searchers followed. About 1,500 feet from the tent, near the edge of the woods, they discovered the remains of a fire. Charred sticks protruded from the snow like skeletal fingers, and there, lying side by side beneath a tall cedar tree, were the first two bodies, Yuri Krivnichenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Their hands were scrapped raw, their fingernails torn, as if they had desperately clawed at the tree to escape something or someone. Above them, the branches of the cedar were broken as high as 15 feet, as though someone had tried frantically to climb, perhaps seeking refuge from whatever had forced them from the tent. But what could drive 9 experienced hikers to such desperation? A few hundred feet away, 3 more bodies were discovered. Dyatlov himself, Zenaida, and Rostam. They were found sprawled in the snow, as if crawling back toward the tent. Their faces were frozen mid-struggle, their arms outstretched, reaching for salvation that never came. None of them wore proper clothing. And then, the searchers found nothing more. The remaining 4 hikers had vanished, swallowed whole by the forest and the snow. For weeks, no trace of them appeared. The mountain had taken them, and it wasn't ready to give them back. The rescuers left the mountain that night shaken, haunted by the grotesque mystery unraveling before them. Something was wrong. People whispered about curses, about spirits in the mountain, about the wrath of the Mansi gods whose sacred land had been disturbed. Others speculated about wild animals, avalanches, or Soviet military experiments. But none of those theories explained the slashed tent, the barefoot escape, or the sheer terror etched into the frozen faces of the dead. The Dyatlov Pass mystery had only just begun, and what they found next would be far more horrifying. By early May, the mountain had thawed just enough to allow searchers back into the frozen wilderness. For more than 2 months, the families of the missing hikers had lived in torment, clinging to a fate hoping that the remaining 4 might somehow be alive, lost, injured, waiting to be found. But when the search resumed, what they discovered was far darker than anyone had imagined. Near a ravine, under 13 feet of hardened snow, the rescuers uncovered a shallow den. It had been carefully carved into the slope, as if the hikers had attempted to create a makeshift shelter against the storm. Inside lay the missing 4, Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thebaur Brignoil. Their bodies were twisted, half buried in icy earth, preserved like grotesque statues in a tomb of snow. But it wasn't simply the discovery that chilled investigators, it was the state of the bodies. Unlike the first 5 victims, these 4 showed injuries that defied explanation. Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest of the group, had massive chest fractures, his ribs shattered as if crushed by an inhuman force. Nikolai's skull was split, fractured from an impact so violent it would have killed him instantly. Yet, there were no external wounds, no bruises or cuts that could explain such devastating trauma. Doctors would later compare the injuries to those seen in car crashes. Then came Lyudmila Dubinina, whose body revealed the most horrifying detail of all. Her tongue was missing, torn out. Some claimed it had been removed while she was still alive. Her eyes too were gone, sockets hollow, as if something had taken them. Whether animals, the elements, or something far worse, no one could say. Rumors swirled like the snow itself. Cannibalism, secret experiments, supernatural retribution. Nothing made sense. Even stranger, those 4 were dressed in scraps of clothing that belonged to the others. Dyatlov's coat, Krivnichenko's torn trousers, and one final, chilling anomaly. Several pieces of clothing carried traces of radiation. The discovery was quietly recorded, whispered about, then buried in classified reports. But why? Where had the radiation come from? The military denied involvement, yet rumors of secret weapon tests, chemical leaks, and government cover-ups took on a life of their own. When the autopsy reports were read, the doctors themselves seemed shaken, almost afraid of what they had seen. They admitted the injuries did not match anything natural or man, but the official report would later settle on something vague, almost mocking. The hikers died due to an unknown compelling force. The Dyatlov Pass incident was no longer just a tragedy, it had become a riddle carved into ice, an open wound in Soviet history, 9 lives shattered on a mountain, a tent ripped open from within, bodies broken in impossible ways, a missing tongue, radiation, and a silence that no theory could ever truly fill. The mountain had spoken, but no one could understand its language.